In popular retellings of World War II, a powerful myth has taken root, painting General George S. Patton as an unstoppable force of speed and aggression who could have shattered the Axis defenses and ended the war months earlier, if only General Dwight D. Eisenhower had not restrained him. In documentaries, books, and bold historical debates, this idea is repeated like legend, portraying Patton as the warrior held back by cautious leadership, the brilliant tactician shackled by political responsibility, and the battlefield genius forced to operate under limitations he believed were unnecessary. In this narrative, Patton becomes the symbol of raw military momentum, the general who wanted to strike swiftly, boldly, and without hesitation, while Eisenhower is often depicted as the cautious strategist, more concerned with alliances, politics, and broad coordination than with Patton's lightning-fast advances. This myth thrives because it embodies drama, the clash between daring ambition and measured restraint. But beneath the storytelling and heroic imagery lies a deeper question. Was Patton truly held back, or was the reality far more complex than legend suggests? When we move beyond the myth and step into the real strategic world of World War II, a very different picture emerges. One in which Dwight D. Eisenhower was not a cautious obstacle to Patton's brilliance, but the supreme commander responsible for something far greater than any single battlefield victory. Eisenhower's duty was not to unleash individual generals at full speed, but to coordinate a vast coalition army, the Americans, the British, but Canadians, the Free French, and dozens of supporting nations, each with their own politics, priorities, and leadership styles. And in this world of fragile alliances, logistics networks, supply routes, and synchronized offensives across hundreds of miles, Eisenhower's job demanded balance, patience, and unity. While Patton thought in terms of speed, breakthrough, and battlefield momentum, Eisenhower had to think in terms of entire theaters, ensuring that advances in one sector did not expose weaknesses in another, that fuel and ammunition could keep pace with movement, that the British command was respected, and that political trust across the coalition remained unbroken. Far from simply holding Patton back, Eisenhower was managing the war at a scale Patton did not have to carry, making decisions not just about where armies would move, but about how the entire Allied war machine would function as one. And when seen through this wider lens, Eisenhower's restraint becomes not timidity, but the calculated discipline required to win a global war. To understand the tension between Patton's aggressive battlefield style and Eisenhower's measured caution, we have to see it not as a clash of ego, but as a clash of responsibility. Because while Patton believed that speed, pressure, and relentless forward motion were the keys to victory, Eisenhower had to weigh every bold maneuver against the risk of catastrophe. And in that contrast, we find the truth behind their dynamic. Patton's genius thrived in moments of rapid opportunity, breakouts, encirclements, shock offensives, where momentum could shatter enemy lines before they had time to regroup. Yet for Eisenhower, every advance came with questions that Patton did not have to answer. Could supply lines keep up? Could flanks remain protected? Could neighboring armies synchronize movement? And what would happen if a daring thrust collapsed under counterattack? To Eisenhower, war was not only about striking hard, it was about ensuring that no single army outran the resources that sustained it or jeopardized the broader Allied front. And while Patton saw hesitation as weakness, Eisenhower saw discipline as survival, because one reckless gamble gone wrong could have cost tens of thousands of lives and destabilized the entire coalition effort. In this way, Patton represented the blade, sharp, fast, and deadly, while Eisenhower represented the hand that controlled it, guiding when to strike, when to hold, and when the price of speed was simply too high, creating a strategic balance that, however tense, ultimately helped secure Allied victory. When we look beyond battlefield movements and examine the hidden machinery of war, The fuel depots, the convoys, the political negotiations, and the fragile trust between allied nations, we begin to see why Eisenhower's decisions sometimes slowed Patton. Because victory in World War II was not only won by bold attacks, but by the constant flow of fuel, ammunition, replacements, and coordination that allowed those attacks to exist at all. And Eisenhower was the man responsible for keeping that machine alive. While Patton demanded more fuel to keep pushing forward across France, Eisenhower had to divide those same resources among multiple armies operating across a massive front, ensuring not just Patton's advance, but Montgomery's, Bradley's, and the British and Canadian forces moving in parallel, all while managing the political pressure of coalition warfare, where every nation needed to feel valued and represented in victory. To Eisenhower, shifting supplies away from one army to feed another was not simply a military calculation, it was a diplomatic risk that could fracture Allied unity. And so his choices reflected not hesitation, but a commitment to sustaining the war effort as a whole, preventing rivalries, fuel shortages, and fractured offensives from unraveling months of hard-earned progress. In this light, what some call holding Patton back becomes the strategic discipline of a commander who understood that wars are not won by a single army racing ahead, but by an entire coalition moving forward together, step by step, until the enemy has nowhere left to stand. When we step back from the legends, the arguments, and the myths of rivalry, what emerges is not a story of Eisenhower's suppressing Patton, but a story of two men whose contrasting strengths formed one of the most effective command partnerships of the war. Because while Patton embodied raw battlefield momentum, speed, improvisation, shock, and relentless forward drive, Eisenhower embodied the calm, disciplined leadership required to bind together armies, nations, and egos into a single unified force. And in that balance, each man enabled the other. Eisenhower gave Patton the space to strike when it mattered most, unleashing him at decisive moments like the Normandy breakout and the relief of Bastogne, while Patton's dramatic battlefield successes, in turn, gave Eisenhower the credibility and leverage he needed to maintain Allied confidence and political unity. They were not opposites in conflict, but opposites in cooperation, one shaping the grand direction of the war while the other executed its most daring operational blows. And although they differed in temperament, Patton fiery and impatient, Eisenhower steady and diplomatic, the combination of those qualities created a strategic harmony that helped carry the Allies across Europe. In the end, the truth is not that Eisenhower held Patton back, but that he guided him. And together, their partnership proved that victory in modern war requires both the unstoppable force and the steady hand that knows exactly when and where to let it strike. The belief that Eisenhower held Patton back did not begin on the battlefield. It was born after the war, shaped by memoirs, headlines, selective memory, and the powerful storytelling of history itself. Because Patton, with his bold personality, dramatic speeches, and spectacular battlefield victories, naturally became the kind of figure people remembered as a lone warrior constrained by cautious leaders, while Eisenhower, whose greatest achievements lived in strategy rooms, diplomatic meetings, and quiet decisions that never made front-page headlines, seemed easier to cast as the restraining force. Over time, films, documentaries, and popular history amplified this narrative, celebrating Patton as the brilliant maverick and portraying Eisenhower as the calm administrator who failed to understand his genius, even though the historical record shows a more complex truth, that Eisenhower was not suppressing Patton, but orchestrating an entire global war effort in which Patton was one vital instrument. Yet myths survive because they feel dramatic, and the story of a fearless general being held back by a cautious commander fits the timeless theme of hero versus authority. So the legend endured, overshadowing the reality that their tension was not rivalry, but the inevitable friction between speed and stability, between battlefield ambition and coalition responsibility. And it is only when we look beyond the myth that we finally see how both men, together, shaped the path to Allied victory. In the years after the war, The public's perception of Patton and Eisenhower began to drift further away from the complex reality of who they truly were, because the world remembered what it could see and feel. Patton's booming speeches, his fierce expressions, his tanks racing across France, while Eisenhower's greatest victories happened in silence, in late-night meetings, diplomatic negotiations, and quiet decisions that shaped the entire course of the war without a single gunshot. And so to ordinary people, Patton looked like the warrior hero, while Eisenhower looked like the calm bureaucrat, even though military reality told a very different story. Eisenhower was the architect who held the alliance together, balancing politics, egos, supplies, strategy, and global logistics on a scale no battlefield commander ever had to carry, while Patton thrived inside that system, excelling because Eisenhower created the conditions that allowed his bold attacks to succeed. Yet public memory favored drama over nuance, sound over silence, action over coordination, and so the legend grew that Eisenhower restrained Patton, that the warrior was caged by the politician, when in truth their roles were complementary, not conflicting. And the victory that ended the war was not the triumph of one man over another, but the result of two very different leaders whose strengths existed in opposite worlds, one commanding the battlefield, the other commanding the war. In the end, the story of Patton and Eisenhower is not a tale of conflict or limitation, but a powerful example of how two opposite kinds of leadership can work together to achieve something far greater than either man could have accomplished alone. Because Patton represented speed, momentum, and relentless offensive spirit, the sharp edge of the spear that pierced through German lines, while Eisenhower embodied patience, coordination, and disciplined restraint, ensuring that every advance Patton made was supported by supplies, allies, diplomacy, and long-term strategy. And when we look closely at history, we see that their differences were not weaknesses, but essential parts of the same machine. Patton drove the war forward, and Eisenhower made sure the war stayed on course. Patton inspired fear in the enemy, while Eisenhower inspired unity among nations. Patton thrived in chaos, and Eisenhower mastered order. And together, those qualities created a balance that turned scattered armies into a single, unstoppable force. So when people ask whether Eisenhower held Patton back, the deeper truth is that Eisenhower's restraint gave Patton the structure he needed to succeed, and Patton's boldness gave Eisenhower the striking power required to win, proving that victory in war does not belong to one kind of leader, but to the harmony between vision and execution, daring and discipline, the battlefield and the command room working as one. Today, when historians, soldiers, and leaders look back on Patton and Eisenhower, they don't just see two generals from a distant war. They see a timeless lesson about leadership, collaboration, and the balance between bold action and disciplined strategy. Because Patton reminds us that progress requires courage, urgency, and the willingness to push forward when others hesitate, while Eisenhower teaches that real victory is built on patience, planning, and the wisdom to think beyond the moment. And together, their story shows that great achievements are rarely the work of one kind of leader alone, but the result of different strengths working in tension, sometimes clashing, sometimes frustrating each other, yet ultimately creating a stronger, more effective whole. In business, politics, the military, and even everyday life, Patton represents the visionary who dares to move fast and break through obstacles, while Eisenhower symbolizes the steady architect who keeps everything grounded and aligned. And when we ask whether Eisenhower held Patton back, the deeper truth becomes clear. Leadership is not about letting one voice dominate, but about knowing when to unleash power and when to control it, when to charge ahead and when to hold steady. Because success comes not from sameness, but from harmony between ambition and responsibility, fire and discipline, passion and restraint. And the legacy of Patton and Eisenhower endures because it reminds us that the greatest victories are won not by lone heroes, but by different minds working together toward one purpose. In the end, the question, did Eisenhower hold Patton back, endures not simply because it is a historical debate, but because it reflects something deeper about how we understand power, ambition, and leadership itself. And as long as people admire boldness, risk-taking, and dramatic action, Patton will continue to symbolize the unstoppable warrior spirit that refuses to slow down, while Eisenhower will represent the quiet guardian of strategy who thinks beyond the battlefield to the larger world around it. And that tension between speed and caution, instinct and calculation, passion and restraint is a tension that still lives in every organization, every government, every army, every team. Because whenever decisions must balance courage with responsibility, we are in some way reliving the story of Patton and Eisenhower. The myth survives because it speaks to human nature, to our desire for heroes who charge ahead and leaders who protect the bigger vision. And the truth is that neither one was wholly right or wrong, because the victory that ended the war was born from both perspectives working together, sometimes uneasily, sometimes imperfectly, but always toward the same goal. And that is why this debate still matters today, not to prove one man greater than the other, but to remind us that real success is rarely the triumph of a single personality, and more often the product of different strengths, different minds, and different kinds of courage moving history forward side by side.